If you think you're too small to be effective, you've never been in bed with a mosquito.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and welcome to another episode of the Nishant Garg Show. The mission of the show is to spread mindfulness awareness, and my job on the show is to invite world-class experts to extract the practices, routines, and habits to live a fulfilled life. Today's guest is Marc Lesser. Marc Lesser is a speaker, facilitator, workshop leader, and executive coach. He is known for his engaging, experiential presentations that integrate mindfulness and emotional intelligence practices and training. He is the author of 4 books, including 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, Lessons from Google, and a Zen Monastery Kitchen. He is CEO of ZBA Associates, an executive development and leadership consulting company. Marc helped develop the world-renowned Search Inside Yourself program within Google, a mindfulness-based emotional intelligence training for leaders, which teaches the art of integrating mindfulness, emotional intelligence. He was a resident of the San Francisco Zen Center for 10 years. In this episode, Marc discusses about his residence at San Francisco Zen Center, open awareness, practice of disengaging, simply pausing, dedicated and integrated mindfulness practice, Zen meditation, everyday mind, and much, much more. To learn more, keep listening. Marc, welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be here.
I'm super thrilled, and it's going to be amazing, mindful conversation with you. So while doing some homework on your long history of success, I found so many great points. And before we go into the weeds, I'm curious to ask you, how would your family describe what you do for a living?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask easy questions. I'm reminded of, are you familiar with the poet David Whyte?
I've heard the name, yes.
Yeah, it's actually quite, I'm very fond of his poetry, and he's a wonderful speaker. And he once said something like, never trust anyone who can very easily describe what it is they do in the world. So that would make me quite trustworthy. I think that my family would say that I do mindfulness leadership work, much of it in the corporate world, and that I'm also a Zen teacher. I think that's what they would say, which is fairly, pretty good.
So speaking of Zen teacher and Zen priest, you spent about 10 years as a resident in San Francisco Zen Center. I want to ask you, what made you to be a resident of that Zen Center?
Yeah, I spent much of my 20s and early 30s there. I think that again, that's not such an easy question to answer, but in some way, I was inspired when I was in college I felt like, well, one of my big inspirations was reading Abraham Maslow and his talking about self-actualization, and this concept that you could actually work on yourself and grow yourself and become stronger emotionally, more flexible, more resilient, and I had some awareness reading about self-actualization, about just how asleep I had been. This was, I was 21 years old. And so I think the realization about just how little I knew myself and my own emotional life, and his description of a small percentage of the population that was highly evolved and that had strong feelings of joy and sadness and grief and appreciation. And I remember wondering, why would anyone do anything else other than, at least as a starting point, to develop your emotional life? And then I think I started reading books about philosophy and about existentialism, and somehow discovered Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki and Zen. And there's something about Zen that just really grabbed my attention. And that kind of pulled me into wandering into the San Francisco Zen Center. And again, I was just taken with the sincerity of the people and the physicality of the practice, and just ended up, my 1 year leave of absence from college turned into 10 years living at the Zen Center, and 5 of those at Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, which was, I think, particularly transformative, was the kind of monastic experience, living on retreat and outside of the kind of conventional world, and that depth of practice. But also, I got to do a lot of really interesting work situations, and was very moved by the integration of meditation practice and work.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners may be aware of Zen. I would like to ask you, people who don't know what Zen is, could you please explain something about Zen? What is Zen?
Yeah, Zen is interesting in that I think one way to explain it is in its founding. It was founded in China, and during a time, I think, when historically many cultures were coming together. And Zen evolved when the very kind of mystical Indian culture, Indian Buddhist culture of the 5th century came in contact with the very kind of grounded farming culture of China. And at the same time, there was the Confucianism was around the ethics of Confucianism and the nature orientation of Taoism. So I think of Zen as this integration of mysticism, practicality and work, ethics and nature. And then at its heart, I think Zen also emphasizes the basic meditation practice, sitting practice. But it has that, the flavor. It has that very kind of, I think, this unconventional flavor. Zen, I think, has a wonderful deep mysticism and a sense of humor as well, and this groundedness. And so that's how Zen evolved.
Yeah. When you were residing in that Zen center, I want to ask you, what practices or what mindfulness practices did you have at that point of time? Or the better question is, what were you learning in those period of time?
Yeah, so I think there was, as I said, there was a good deal. I think a daily meditation practice was core, but then I think a lot of the practice was seeing work as a form of mindfulness practice, of service, and that there was this sense of joy and love and appreciation of meditation practice. And in some way, meditation practice, I think, was seen as an expression of your best self or your Buddha nature, and work was seen as an expression more in action and in the confines of working with people, and the challenges of seeing how different we are and our styles, and bringing awareness into that, and as much mindfulness. It's interesting, this word mindfulness, I feel like, means so many different things, but in the context of work, I think in part it's how to inspire others, be inspired by others, and at the same time to produce really high quality results. I like a practice that I've been teaching a lot lately is called, compassionate accountability. And I think that is kind of maybe a core mindfulness practice, is this combination of compassion in the sense of taking care of the people, loving the people, and at the same time holding each other accountable for producing excellent results.
How can we practice this compassionate accountability practice in our daily life?
Yeah, well, I think this is something I find that in the work, it's particularly, I think, relevant and important for any work situation, because so much of work is around accountability. But I think that the practice of paying a lot of attention to, accountability, I think it includes honesty and morality and ethics, as well as keeping to your word, doing what you say you're going to do, recognizing when you are meeting your goals or not meeting your goals. So this is like seeing accountability as a practice. And at the same time, the compassion piece is caring deeply and taking care of the people that you're working with, whether it's your coworkers or your customers. And there is, I think, in the workplace a natural tension between these two. In a sense, they look like two ends of a spectrum, right? That how do you get things done and be effective, and at the same time, how do you express real care and compassion for your people? And I think more and more they are, I think it's realized that they are, in a sense, it may, in certain situations, they may feel like some tension between them, but for the most part, they go together really well. And I think that part of mindful leadership is being really, really good, really effective, really developed at both accountability as well as compassion.
Yes. Do you feel that teaching compassion at a workplace isn't easy? Accountability part may not be tough, but teaching compassion could be a challenging thing.
Well, I think it's only because of the word. And so sometimes in some workplaces, the word compassion might be perceived as, too soft, or, so you can easily replace compassion with building inner strength, right? Or you
That
can
is a
replace,
strong word.
or you can replace it with trust and caring. Building, I think most people these days, that trust, caring, alignment are, I think, emotional intelligence. I think these are all words and concepts that are highly, highly valued. So I think it's balancing the people part, the caring part, the trust part, with the getting things done, the measurements, the meeting goals, what are usually, so it's, again, what are usually seen as the hard sciences and the soft sciences. But I think that they are both essential. You have to have both to have a effective workplace.
I would like to come back to this mindful leadership and about your book in a while. And before that, we were talking about meditation in that Zen Center, and you teach weekly meditation in Mill Valley Zen Center, if I say the name correctly.
Yes.
What kind of meditations do you teach?
Zen meditation is, I think of it as it's a very, in some way, it's very basic, but I think we humans are so deep and complicated that we just are. It's amazing. It's amazing the human, the human mind and body. So Zen meditation is essentially sitting with your mind and body, and not being caught by your thinking mind, so that there is, basic practice of following the breath or counting the breath. And Zen meditation, I would say, is both a training the mind in focus, right? So being able to not be distracted, to be able to come back to the breath and the body, And it's also a practice that emphasizes open awareness, kind of opening the mind and body to one's sensations, feelings, thoughts. It's interesting. One of the founders of Zen in Japan in the 13th century, a man named Dogen, was famously said, this practice is not meditation. So there's this. So Zen likes to pull the carpet out, pull the rug out from things that you think are so. So this has nothing to do with meditation. It's basically, and it's just this sitting quietly is an expression of your true nature. It's an expression of reality. And I think that Zen meditation is sitting in the middle of all of your thoughts and feelings and stories, and in some way cultivating the reality that they don't define us. So it's playing. It's this Dogen fellow also famously said, to study the way is to study the self, and to study the self is to go beyond the self, and to go beyond the self is to realize your oneness with everyone and everything.
There are many things you covered in a short period of time. So we have mindfulness meditation, and you spoke about Zen meditation, sitting quietly. So I would like to ask you, is there any difference between mindfulness meditation and Zen meditation?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's interesting that I think that mindfulness is this enormous subject of thousands of years of practice and history and philosophy, as is Zen. And in some way, mindfulness practice is just such a core part of Zen practice. And I think, it's be hard for me, and maybe someone else could answer you better than I could, but
no, it's fine.
it's hard for me to parse apart, any difference between Zen meditation and mindfulness meditation. Again, I think at their core, it's the practice of the aspiration to live in reality, the aspiration to not be fooled by things, and to see as clearly as possible. And and I think some of the elements, maybe some of the elements that would be in whether it's Zen meditation or mindfulness meditation is a sense of suffering or discomfort, or not pushing away difficulty, an attunement around impermanence, an attunement around selflessness, and this sense of studying the self as a way of going beyond the self. And I think maybe some sense that freedom is possible, that it's possible to be free of our usual kind of ego self-driven thinking and behavior.
And in one of your blogs, you mentioned that Zen is a practice of developing a responsive and flexible mind while keeping your heart open.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty good. I like that. I do remember writing that some time ago. Right.
And as a listener to this podcast, I'm thinking, Mark, what time do you meditate? What does your meditation practice look like every day?
It's funny. My practice has shifted during this pandemic because I'm now able to. I've been sitting most mornings with the San Francisco my friends and one of my communities, the San Francisco Zen Center, does an online sitting every morning starting at 5:50 a.m., 2 30-minute periods and 10 minutes of walking meditation in between. That's my daily practice. I also sit, as you mentioned, Mill Valley Zen on Wednesday nights. And then I like to do 1 day sittings, ideally once a month, but I don't, these days I may not always do it that often. And then I usually do a longer sitting once a year, like a 5-day or 7-day retreat yearly. That's my meditation practice.
So there are a lot of people, I believe, may struggle with practicing meditation on a consistent basis. How do you influence, or what do you suggest people to be consistent at this practice?
Yeah. I think it's really helpful to sit with others, to not try and do it alone. And these days, and I think in general now, if you can't be in person with others, there are so many opportunities. There are literally hundreds, probably thousands of online meditation groups now that find one, or find a person, or find a few people that you can sit with, either again in person or virtually. So there is something about, I think, because we are such social creatures, that it just really helps. It helps with accountability to if you say you're gonna show up and sit at a certain time, that it just really helps. And I think the hardest thing I've noticed for people is to start a meditation practice, to get it in your body and in your bones, and to get it to become, again, I often suggest to people that you think of it like brushing your teeth, that you don't wake up every morning and think, am I going to brush my teeth? You just do it. And I don't wake up and think, am I going to meditate? It's just something that I do. And I think it takes a little while, I think, to experience the benefits of meditation, to experience that it is an enormous help in, kind of going back even to your quoting of me on my blog, in terms of, I think it's so useful in being less reactive and more responsive, and as well as helping to keep one's heart open even when things are really difficult and challenging.
Meditation can be a struggle in the beginning, but as we keep practicing over a period of time, we get better and better. It's like any other practice. Over a period of time, we get better, and it becomes a habit, like brushing our teeth, as you said.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that, I think it takes some trust or faith, especially in the beginning. And yeah, and I don't know. I don't know that I would use that language. I don't know that I'm any better at it now than I was 40 years ago when I started. But again, I think the Zen, the Zen school, or I think the mindfulness school, uh, emphasizes not trying to be an expert, not worrying about being better at it, giving up all ideas about achievement is I think actually a core part of mindfulness practice and Zen meditation. Now, of course, we have some intention, right? So it's not that we don't have an intention or a reason for sitting, right? So we might, I might sit meditation because I want to be more responsive, or I want to deal with stress, or I want to be less egotistical. But when I'm actually doing the practice, I'm letting go of all that. I'm just being with my breath, being with my body, letting go of, as much as I possibly can, of all ideas of accomplishment or getting anything. So it's a little bit paradoxical that way, but
Yeah.
I think it's fairly easy to understand as well.
Yeah, we can say that it's a practice of letting go and non-attachment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so it's interesting, especially in the work world, where there's so much emphasis on goals and achievement and accountability. And one of the things that I find, I've been doing a fair amount of coaching over the last couple of years of executives, and one of the things that I've been talking about a lot is this practice of engaging and the practice of disengaging, and how that people often don't think about that, how useful it can be able to consciously or mindfully go back and forth between engaging in activity and in achieving things and accomplishing things, but how important it is to be able to let it go, to be able to relax and let go of any sense of achievement. And this is, I think, one of the things that we can, having a regular meditation practice can enable us to be able to disengage at times, even when we're trying to get stuff done, even in the midst of a stressful, full-on workday, to be able to disengage.
Is there any other practice along with meditation that we can do to disengage ourselves?
Yeah, I think there's lots of practices. I think, walking meditation, journal writing, like just practicing letting go of editing and overthinking, and just letting bringing thoughts and feelings to the page can be a really good practice. I think spending time in nature for a lot of people can be a practice of disengaging. Even, it's interesting, even just listening practice. So just letting go of the idea that you need to show up as smart or that you need to prove something, and just as you're listening to another person, to completely disengage from your own, for whatever, anything that you need to do or prove, and just completely give yourself over to listening, is, I think, perhaps a form and practice of disengaging.
What's your personal go-to disengaging practice, so to speak?
Yeah, I think again, I think about, I talk about, dedicated practice and integrated practice, these two buckets of mindfulness practice. So my go-to dedicated practice is meditation practice, and I would say that my dedicated integrated practice is maybe listening, right? So disengaging from concerns about myself, and just listening, just being curious, the practice of curiosity about what this person is saying, and who this person is.
Listening, active listening.
Yeah, and
active
listening, not only for content, but listening for feelings, listening, beneath the words, and being curious about, what's really being communicated here.
Yes. You have talked about, or you talk about at Zen Center, about everyday mind and finding your true path. What is everyday mind? I'm curious to ask you that.
Yeah, I think this is a lot like, I think this a little bit like this practice of disengaging. It's everyday mind is, not it's the mind that is not comparing and judging and criticizing. It's a mind that is more open and curious. It's right. I'd say it's the mind. Well, it's like what in Shunryu Suzuki and his book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So it's like beginner's mind. It's the mind that is open and not fixed, not fooled by things. This is, I think, this.
When you do executive coaching, do you recommend meditation to the executives?
Often, again, I think I'll often inquire if the person has a meditation practice, and then if they do, that can be something that we talk about, or even sometimes do some sitting practice together. Or if they're curious about it, I will often work with the person on building up. Sometimes it can be just starting out by doing, a few minutes a day of things that are achievable. I've now embraced. I used to be a little bit, I think, critical or judgmental about guided meditations, but I've changed my ways there. I've I think that for a lot of people, guided meditations can be really helpful. I'll be curious to see someday. I think there'll be scientific studies that will compare the effectiveness of guided versus non-guided. I haven't seen any, but my sense is that guided meditations are just as useful, and maybe more for some people who, again, for some people, people find it quite helpful to be able to practice with listening to guiding or encouraging words. And I've been doing more and more guided meditations myself.
What made you change your mind about guided meditation?
I think just seeing how many people rely on them, and that for a lot of people, it just works better. It provides an access point into meditation that I think they wouldn't have without having that support.
I would like to shift some gears here, and your new book, Becoming a Mindful Leader. You have portrayed 7 practices of becoming a mindful leader, and they are into 3 categories, such as investigate, connect, and integrate. So, mindful leader, can this be used for somebody who is not a leader?
Sure. I mean, the word, it's funny language, because in some sense, my assumption is everyone's a leader, right? So we're all leading our lives. These days, so many of us are having to be entrepreneurs, are having to have a lot of these leadership qualities in our work. And most of us in some way we might be in or will be in a leadership role, and so that's a particular kind of leader, but we might be leading a team, or we might be on a team. So I think especially in the work world, we all in some way need to be developing these leadership skills. And then I think even in our personal lives, whether it's in terms of developing our own well-being, developing our relationships, that so many of those so-called leadership skills carry over into all parts of our lives. It's one of the things that I really appreciate about this work of mindful leadership, is that it's really, I think, the work of being a full human being.
Yes, and being compassionate, authentic, bringing vulnerability at a workplace. These things are not easy to talk about at a workplace.
Well, I think that's changing. I think it's changing. That again, not all workplaces, not all companies, not all teams, but more and more. I think that the work that I did at Google, and that Google embracing mindfulness as their kind of well-being initiative, I think, it's funny that now goes back time. It's now almost 15 years ago.
Wow.
That started teaching mindfulness at Google, and now I think that and many other companies, SAP and Aetna, and more, I think companies embracing mindfulness has made it easier and easier to talk about things like compassion and compassionate accountability and emotional intelligence. Well, I think emotional intelligence was, emotional intelligence in some way kind of maybe helped pave the way, and then the work of John Kabat-Zinn, making kind of de-hooking mindfulness from religion, and then I think some big well-known corporate companies embracing mindfulness has all kind of made it easier to and people, I think, are more and more interested and curious about how to create mindful cultures. And so my book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, kind of came out of the work that I was doing at Google.
Would you say that emotional intelligence is a byproduct of mindfulness practices?
Well, it's interesting the way. Again, I think these mental models. I think we want to be a little careful about getting too rigid about them. But the way I think about them is that emotional intelligence is a whole kind of specific set of capacities of working with yourself and working with others. So self-awareness and self-management, motivation, empathy, and communication skills or social skills are kind of the key buckets of emotional intelligence. And I generally teach and think that mindfulness is a practice that supports all of these capacities. That when we talk about things like self-awareness, there needs to be some somatic practice, some body practice, and that's where mindfulness and particularly mindfulness meditation come into play. That you can't develop emotional intelligence through reading about it or talking about it. There needs to be integration with the body and the kind of body-mind practices.
Yes, I love how you explain that. When we keep practicing all these things in our daily life, it becomes an integration. We don't have to do it every time. It becomes like mindful meditation, mindful walk. It just becomes a part of our daily lives.
Yeah, again, I think that, going back to where you started talking about Zen, but I would say this is true of, whether it's Zen or mindfulness. Essentially, the question is, how can we be full human beings? How can we live meaningful, useful lives? Really, how can we do that? What does that mean? What does that look like? What gets in the way? And I think these were the essential questions that were being asked and are being asked about, mindfulness and mindful leadership is, how can we develop ourselves? How can we develop our own awareness? And how can we help others?
Yeah, and just pausing and doing nothing. Sometimes doing nothing is challenging for us.
Yeah, doing nothing and being really good at what we do. Both, right? And that, yeah, being really good at doing nothing, disengaging, and being really good at whatever our craft is, and in our communication, in how we, not only in what our craft is, but in how we move through. How do we move through the world? Do we move through the world in a way where we are a force for good, a force for healing? Yeah. Or are we creating more stress in the world?
Yes. I know that, Mark, you have mentioned so many quotes in your work. Is there any quote that you live your life with, or any quote that inspires you the most?
Oh, yes. Let's see. Quotes. It's funny. The first one that comes to mind is, if you think you're too small to be effective, you've never been in bed with a mosquito, which was a greeting card.
That's a good one.
A greeting card I published when my first company. I used to run a greeting card company. But there is quotes I've been leaning on quite a bit lately have been this Wendell Berry quote, where Wendell Berry was a fifth generation Kentucky farmer and writer, and he said, "Be joyful, though you've considered all the facts. Be joyful, though you've considered all the facts." And I think that's a good, in a way, another possible working definition of mindfulness is to consider everything, and yet find joy or find appreciation in everything.
Through mindfulness and Zen meditation or mindfulness meditation, we can connect to our pain. We can connect to others' pain, and that's what you talk about in your book, connecting with pain.
So, yeah, I think I should just, at least once rattle off the 7 practices, because I think they're very,
Please.
they're very poetic, and they're also very practical, right? So the practices are love the work, do the work, don't be an expert, connect to your pain, connect to the pain of others, depend on others, and keep making it simpler.
We make it complex. Human beings make it complex.
Yes. That's why I think the seventh practice, I think it's such a relief, right? All these practices, but just keep making it simpler. Keep finding a way to come back to what matters most. What matters most.
Actually, I've taken the screenshot of these 7 practices and put into my Word document so that I can review it again and again.
Beautiful.
And what books, if I would like to ask you about the books that you have gifted the most apart from your own book?
Yeah, I really love the books by Shunryu Suzuki, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and Not Always So. In the business world, I'm often recommending a book called Difficult Conversations by Douglas Stone. I think almost any books by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen teacher, or Pema Chodron, who's also a mindfulness teacher in a slightly different tradition called the Vipassana tradition. I think I strongly recommend something about poetry. Just read, get some poetry collections. Yeah, I mean, Mary Oliver is quite wonderful. Yeah, so much to read.
So much to read. And speaking of Thich Nhat Hanh, there is a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that I have quoted in almost every podcast episode. There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And Mark, so before I ask you my last question for this recording, I want to ask you, or do you want to share anything with our listeners? Anything, any closing thought, any recommendation, suggestion, or where can they find you online? Anything that you want to share?
Yeah, I just, I think it's interesting. The Thich Nhat Hanh quote, it's also something about, the way is, just our life is our practice. Our life is our practice. Our practice is our life. And, in the Zen monasteries, there's these wooden boards that are hit by a wooden hammer as signals to call people to meditation, and written on them is something like, wake up, life is short. Yeah, don't lose sight of that life. Life is short. And you can find me. My website is Marc Lesser, MarcLesser.net. You can sign up. I do a weekly newsletter and try and make a good deal of value and offerings in my weekly writings and my book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader.
Wonderful. And I will put all these links into the show notes.
Thank you so much.
And Mark, my last question is, what's the impact you want to leave onto this world?
Yeah, I want to be as awake and free and as I can possibly be, and I'd like to help others to wake up to living in reality as much as we possibly can.
Thank you so much. That is so beautiful, and this is definitely a wake-up call for me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, or you can visit https://nishantgarg.me, NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this episode with your loved ones to help them live a fulfilled life. You are not alone in this journey. We all struggle in life. There is no shame in talking about it. I go through my highs and lows. I get depressed, and these practices help me in living a resilient life. You can also do this. You got this. Don't judge yourself. You are doing the best you can. And thank you so much again.